Hello, Stephen. Good afternoon.
Hello, Rabbi.
How are you?
Thank God, Baruch Hashem. Usual, like everybody, have struggled in certain areas.
Hi, John.
Especially with the effect of the pandemic on the earnings, the income, and all that. So,
Sure.
yeah, it's a struggle. But thank God, my health. Every morning I give Odiani for my health, what I have. Thank you. You.
Baruch Hashem. Hello, guys. Hi, John. Good, Baruch Hashem. Hi, Kent. Welcome. Okay, at 1 o'clock, I'm going to share the screen. And we'll get started. Today is the final chapter in the section that we're learning, the Temidin and uMusafim, the additional sacrifices. We've gone through the extra sacrifices that happen on all the different special days of the year. And the last Chagim, as it were, or the last Yamim Tovim to be dealt with are Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And that's what we're going to deal with. That's what we're going to deal with today. It should be noted, just as we learn about Yom Kippur had, we know, you read through the Avodah on Yom Kippur, and there were many offerings that the Kohen Gadol bought and so on, but those are not dealt with yet. We deal just with the communal Musaf offerings. So you'll see it's quite compact, it's straightforward, and it's quite easy. And parallels similar to Rosh Hashanah, as Rambam points out. All the other offerings which were also additional because they were unique to Yom Kippur, but which were considered really individual offerings of the Kohen Gadol, is dealt with elsewhere, where the Rambam deals with specifically going through the halachot relating to the special service of the day of Yom Kippur. Okay, and then we have the holiday of Sukkot, which we'll speak to today, and we'll see that the holiday of Sukkot stands out in its Musaf offering from the other unique days when we had a Musaf offering. And in essence, what we found is that there were kind of three categories. There was Pesach and Shavuot. Then there's Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and Shmini Atzeret as a separate category. And a third category would be the days of Sukkot and how the Musaf offering was brought. So let's begin. It's the final chapter, so it's wonderful to finish a section again together. And the first halakha. The Musaf offering of Yom Kippur is like that of Rosh Hashanah, which you bring an extra bull and ram. This ram is called the ram of the people, and 7 sheep. On all are burnt offerings, they are olah offerings, and then a goat, as with other Musaf days, is brought as a sin offering and is eaten in the evening. The point being that it can't be eaten on Yom Kippur itself, obviously for obvious reasons, so it's eaten in the evening. Halacha base. In addition, the community offers another goat as a sin offering. It is burnt. Its pair is the goat sent to Azazel. So this again is distinct from Rosh Hashanah, and it's something that is unique to Yom Kippur, but it's also considered a communal offering as opposed to the other offerings that we referred to just previously that will be dealt with as in a unique section dealing with the laws of Yom Kippur. So that's the 2 goats. One goes as a chatas offering, and one was sent, as we know, to be thrown off the cliff. Halacha 3. On the first day of Sukkot, the following are brought as the additional offerings of the day. 13 bulls, and this is what's very unique to Sukkot, and then 2 rams and 14 sheep. 14 sheep as opposed to, I guess 7 on a normal Musaf offering. All are burnt offerings, and then beyond the olah, as we had with other Musaf, a goat which is eaten is brought as a sin offering. Similarly, on all the 7 days of Sukkot festival, 2 rams, 14 sheep, and a sin offering of a goat are offered. That will remain constant throughout Sukkot as the Musaf offering, but that unique offering of the 13 bulls on each day of Sukkot will change. So as we see in Halacha Dalet, the number of bulls offered over is decreased each day. On the second day, 12 bulls offered. On the third, 11, until on the seventh day, 7 bulls. And then you continue with the rest will be the same. 2 rams, 14 sheep, all brought as burnt offerings, and a goat which is brought as a sin offering. And then, of course, we have the 8th day, which is Shmini Atzeret. And here we see from the structure of the Musaf that it's a standalone holiday. And we'll see that its Musaf offering is the same as Yom Kippur and Rosh Hashanah. So it gives you a sense of the status, as it were, of that day. So on Shmini Atzeret, the following are brought as the additional offering of the day: 1 bull, a ram, and 7 sheep. All are burnt offerings, and a goat is brought as a sin offering. This is a separate offering in its own right. Now, the Rambam doesn't speak about it over here, but obviously it's discussed at length in other places, the Gemara and Jewish thought. These extra bulls really were brought, if you count up all the bulls, there were 70 bulls that were brought, which we said are brought on behalf of the nations of the world. Now, you might be familiar that Shmini Atzeret is considered a unique day of connection of the Jewish people and Hashem, and is symbolized by the 1 bull that was brought. Instead of those diminishing numbers of 13 to 7, on the 8th day, we brought 1, which represents that unique oneness and connection of a Jew and Hashem. Halacha 6. On all the 7 days of Sukkot festival, so besides for the extra Musaf animal offerings, we had a special libation, a water libation, Nisuch HaMayim. That's poured on the altar. Now, this practice is halacha communicated to Moshe at Sinai, meaning this was something that was passed down by tradition from Moshe, is not explicitly stated in the verses of the Torah itself, although it's alluded to. The water was poured as a separate libation together with the morning wine libation. When was it brought? The same time when you poured the wine in the morning with the Tamid offerings. Now, this, by the way, is what the great celebration on Sukkot took place around. We refer to the great celebrations of Sukkot as Simcha de Beit HaShoeva, the Simcha, the joy, the celebration that's associated with drawing water. And we'll see in a moment that water was drawn and then brought up to the Beit HaMikdash. And every single day, great celebrations would take place around that ceremony of bringing the water up for when it would be then poured on the altar at the morning together with the wine libation. Now, he says, if one poured the water into the wine or the wine into the water, in other words, although ideally they're meant to be 2 separate libations, but if they happen to be mixed together, and then he poured the 2 of them as a libation from a single utensil, you have fulfilled your obligation. It's not the ideal way, but it works. If the water libation was offered before the daily sacrifice, indeed, even if it was offered at night, the obligation is fulfilled, although ideally it should be done after the morning sacrifice together with the libation of the wine. Now, the libation was poured at the southwest corner, above the midpoint of the altar, and then it would all descend to the shittim, as we explained. Basically, there's a contraption of almost like a gutter that it would go down. So you don't pour the water onto the top of the altar where you had the fires that we spoke about. There was a special place on the corner where it would be poured down essentially into like a pipe that it would then run out. How was it offered? He would fill a golden vessel that contained 3 lugin from the Shiloach stream. So the Shiloach stream was some just to the south of the Beis HaMikdash, where they would go and get this fresh water that came from the stream, from the spring. And then a procession would come up to what was called the water gate, and it was called the water gate because that's where they would bring the water through in part of this procession. And they would blow Tekiah, Trua, and Tekiah from the shofar, and the Kohanim would ascend the ramp and turn to his left and pour the water into a cup that was positioned there. So from this golden container into a special cup, for there were 2 silver cups. There was 2 cups. The water was poured into the western one, and the wine libation was poured into the eastern one. There was 2 cups with above the so-called pipe were drained. And he says, now these 2 cups were pierced with 2 small holes, like 2 small nostrils. As you pour into the cup, and then the liquid would then come through, feed through those little punctures, the piercings that you had. And he says the hole for the cup of the water was thinner than the one for the wine, so that the water would conclude flowing together with the wine. Because you poured it at the same time, you also wanted them to finish draining, as it were, at the same time, because the consistency of the wine is a bit thicker, so it will flow through a bit slower. So you made the holes through which the water went a little bit smaller so that they would end up emptying out at the same time. Halacha 8, they would tell the priests who would pour the water of libation, lift up your hands. And as when he poured, people wanted to see how he was pouring. Why? Because once, and this is brought down in the Mishnah, there was a priest who poured the water onto his feet, meaning not onto the altar, onto where it was going to get drained through the altar as it should, which is the requirement of this libation, but onto his feet. And what happened then? What was the big issue over here? Because as we mentioned, that this is a mitzvah, this is a practice which comes Moshe Misinai, it was part of the oral Torah. It's not an explicit verse in the Torah instructing this. So there was a sect amongst the Jewish people called the Tzidukim. And these Tzidukim, or the Sadducees, they purported to believe in the divinity of Torah, but that is the final word. There is no oral Torah, there is no rabbinic interpretation, and no oral Torah, and they didn't follow that. So because it's not explicitly written to pour water, they wouldn't do that. Now, there was times when they made their way into the service in the temple, and that was a problem. What happened at that particular occasion, as the Mishnah tells us, the entire nation, everybody was standing there, realized that he had poured it onto his feet and not into the altar, and they realized he was one of these Sadducees, and they stoned him with their etrogim. Not a very pretty picture. For they said he was a Sadducee. The Sadducees say there is no water libation. And obviously in the temple, such a flagrant obedience, as it were, was not tolerated at the time. And we don't want that to repeat itself. So they would tell him, raise your hands, we want to see what you're doing over there. Halacha 9, the water libation was performed on the Shabbos in the same manner in which it was performed during the week, except that on Friday, a golden jug that was not a sacrificial vessel was filled with water and left in the chamber. And the next morning, the pitcher used for the libation was filled from it. Because on Shabbos, you couldn't go and collect the water and carry. It wasn't because you're outside the Beit HaMikdash, you can't carry. So the water was prepared from the night before. It couldn't be left in a sacrificial vessel because that cannot be done. Otherwise it disqualifies it. So there was a special vessel, and then it was poured into the particular vessel used for the process of this libation, and the rest would be done the same. Now he says, if the water was spilled or was uncovered, so it fell over, the water that was prepared, or it was uncovered, and you're not allowed to use water that has remained overnight uncovered in sacrificial service. So if that happened by chance, then now you're stuck. You don't have water. You can't go to the shiluach because you can't carry. What do? So then you can fill the pitcher from the basin, the kior, the basin being that holy basin from where the kohanim would wash their hands and feet. So you can get water from there on that occasion, and you'd use that water for the libation. Sorry, there's mute there. I think we're getting some sounds coming through. Halacha 11. On every day of Sukkot festival, a separate song was recited for the Musaf offering. The Rambam is just going to tell us different parts of Tehillim that they came from. The themes that follow through here is the theme of joy of Sukkot, the reminder that one has to fulfill their obligations as far as tithing, because Sukkot was the time when it ought to have been done. And each day a different psalm was sung as part of the unique Musaf offering, the different amounts of cows that were brought and so on. So he says on the first day of Chol Hamoed they would sing. This is from Tehillim Chaf Tes, rendered to, let's read in the Hebrew because it doesn't make too much difference. We can read the psukim. He says, Hovel Hashem Ne'elim Basheni, on the second day. Now, by the way, this is the second day of Chol Hamoed. The first day of Sukkot we're not talking about. We're talking about the first day Chol Hamoed, second day Chol Hamoed. So you read from Tehillim 16, which is Rosh Omer Alekim. On the third day of Chol Hamoed, you read my mistake. Tehillim 9, but the 50, but from the second half of it. And on the third day, Tehillim that has the verse Miyokim Li Im Reim. On the fourth day of Chol Hamoed, Bina Bayim Ba'am. On the fifth day, Hasireisim Yisrael Shichmoi. And on the sixth day, Yimaitu Kol Mois Ti'aretz. What happens? V'im Chol Shabbos Lias Be'echad Mehen. What happens if Shabbos was one of the days of Chol Hamoed? Now, it could be that the first day of Sukkot was Shabbos. Then it wouldn't shift things out. But if the first day of Shabbos was Chol Hamoed, then Be'echad Mehen Yimaitu V'yidcha. Or then you would say the song of Shabbos, and you would just push off to the next day the correct psalm for the day that it was following the Shabbos. Now, in Halacha Yud Beis, we're going to talk about the procedure of who would bring these Musaf offerings on Sukkot, because as we've already learned that there were 24 priestly watches, and each one was part of the service. So we wanted to divide it in such a way that each individual priestly group was given the responsibility, the opportunity to bring at least one of the sacrifices. So this is how it worked. So we already explained that there were a total of 24 priestly watches, and they all served with equal rights during the festivals. So on the holiday of Sukkot, each watch would offer one bull, one ram, or a goat as a sin offering. Okay, so one watch would take one animal. With regard to the sheep, remember there's 14 sheep, however, there was a difference. There were watches which would offer 2 sheep, sometimes we would offer 2, and there were watches which offer 1 sheep. So how did this work? What's implied? And he's going to go through this day by day, but the formula is the same. On the first day of the festival of Sukkot, there are 13 bulls, 2 rams, and a goat. That takes care of 16 groups, right? You now have 14 remaining animals. And how many groups do you have left? You got 8, right? So for every watch that receives an animal to offer, would offer one of these animals. Thus, there remains 14 sheep for 8 watches. You got 8 groups. So how do you divide that? So he says 6 watches, 6 of the groups would offer 2 sheep, and 2 watches would offer 1. And because each day we diminish one of the bulls, what you're going to see is you're left over with, you're going to have 9 groups that need to divide those 14. And then you need 10 groups that have to divide the 14. So we'll see. That's how the formula goes. On the second day, there are 12 bulls, 2 rams, and a goat. Every watch that receives an animal to offer would offer one of these animals. Thus, there remains 14 sheep for 9 watches. 5 watches offer 2 sheep, and 4 offer 1. On the third day, again, you'd follow the same procedure. 11 bulls, 2 rams, and a goat. Every watch that receives an animal to offer would offer one of these animals. Thus, there remains 14 sheep for 10 watches. 4 watches offer 2 sheep, and 6 would offer 1 each. On the fourth day, there are 10 bulls, 2 rams, the same as then 2 rams and a goat. Every watch would offer one of these animals. Now you have 14 sheep. You've got 11 groups that need. 3 would offer 2, and 8 would offer 1. On the fifth day, now you only got 9 bulls, plus the 2 rams and the goat. And so 1 per group. And now you have 14 sheep for 12 groups that need an offering. 2 for 2 of the groups, and 10 would each bring 1. On the sixth day, there are 8 bulls, 2 rams, and a goat. Every watch would offer one of these animals. Thus, you have 14 sheep to divide amongst 13 watches. So 1 group would bring 2 sheep, and all the other groups would bring 1 sheep. And on the seventh day, there are 7 bulls, 2 rams, and a goat, and 14 sheep, which is the equivalent number of the additional watches. Each would offer 1 animal. Now here, how did they work this out? How did they divide it? We know about lotteries that were drawn when there wasn't enough services to the amount of groups that needed to do the service. But here you've got enough, right? So how do they do it? Whichever watch offered a bull on one day did not offer a bull on the next day. The only time when there was an overlap was between day 1 and day 2. Because between those 2 days, you have 25 altogether, right? 13 and 12. There's 24 groups. So somebody had to get it twice. But otherwise, nobody would get a bull more than once. So if you weren't given a bull, then you would be given one of the sheep. And that's how it worked. It would like rotate. So whichever watch offered a bull, one day did not offer a bull the next day. Instead, they would rotate. On the 8th day, so now the 8th day, we learned that you didn't have that many offerings, right? Because it was 1 bull. Not like the rest of the days of Yom Tov. It was more like what was done on Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur. 1 bull, 1 ram, and 7 sheep. So what do? Then it was allotted through lottery, in which all watches are equal, as we explained, and whoever won it, and brought it on behalf of everybody else. On day Halacha 14, when the first day of the festival of Sukkot falls on Shabbos, there would be, the Rambam is just going now to the mincha offerings that were brought together with all these offerings. If you work it out, per cow that was bought, there was 3, and then per ram there was 2. So altogether you have 61 esronim of accompanying meal offerings from the additional offerings and the continuous offerings. And he says it's important to note that they would not be mixed together. Firstly, practically mixing 61 esronim of flour didn't work. And the other concern, and we'll see it as it plays out in the next halachot, is that the oil flour ratio for menachot that were brought for rams and for cows is not the same as the ratio that was for the menacha that was brought for sheep. And therefore, you can't mix it all together because you're not required the same ratio from a practical perspective. Okay, so he says, now, the accompanying meal offerings are never mixed together. So each one has to be prepared separately, offered separately. Instead, the accompanying offerings of the bull are prepared and offered separately. He says, however, for the bulls, you can do all of the bulls together. So 3 times 13 for the first day, 3 times 12 for the second day, and so on. Those of the rams could be prepared separately, and those of the sheep would be prepared separately. So you can combine the different meal offerings for all the sheep, but you can't combine the offerings of the ram and the sheep, or the bulls and the ram, and so on. But this applies both with regard to common offerings and individual offerings. If it's the same animal, you can combine, but different animals you don't combine. Now, one of them says like this. Before we go on, he says there's something else that's not combined, and that's the fats of the sacrifices that are offered on the altar. And here, whether from communal sacrifices or from individual sacrifices, they're not mixed with each other. Right? Instead, the fats and the organs of each sacrifice are offered on the altar's pyre separately. If, however, they become mixed together, they may be offered as one. So ideally, they're separate, but they can. Now, if the meal offerings or the accompanying offerings became intermingled after each type was mixed with oil separately, they are acceptable. See, one of the concerns, as I mentioned, is that the ratio for the mincha offering for the sheep is not as the same as the ratio for the mincha offering for rams and bulls. But if, let's say, you mix the mincha offering for sheep, you mix the mincha offering for rams, you mix the mincha offering for the bulls, and then that combined together, you can offer it as one. Now, since the meal offerings were mixed together and the oil, in other words, if it happened that the meal offerings were mixed together and the oil and meal have become intermingled in a way that was acceptable, as we read in the previous halacha, it is permissible now to mix their wine libations together as an initial preference. Ideally, you wouldn't mix the wine libations together either. Now, here's the halachic concern. Mixing the wine libations is not as much as a problem of mixing the mincha libations where the ratios were different, because wine is wine is wine. But there was a halacha that you don't mix the wine libations, and the concern was that if you start mixing the wine libation, you may end up mixing their mincha libations. But in this scenario where it was already mixed, and it was mixed in a way that it was acceptable. What was the way that it was acceptable? Because you initially had the sheep one's done on their own, the ram one's done on their own, and the bull one's done on their own. Now they mix together. So they don't, and it's still a kosher way. Then you can go ahead and you can mix the wines for one libation, not a problem. Similarly, if the meal offerings or the accompanying offerings were already offered, so if you've already mixed it as it was meant to, and it was already brought on the mizbeach, but you have not yet poured the wine libation, then you can mix the wine libations because you've taken away the concern, right? The concern was that if you mix the wine, you might mix the mincha. But if practically the mincha was done and it's kosher, you can then mix the wine. Each one separately is permitted to mix the wine libation together. Halacha 19. When the wine libations of the accompanying offerings are mixed together, so if it happened that they mixed together, it's permissible to mix the wine libation of a sacrifice offered on the previous day even, with one offered on the present day, of those of an individual offering with those of a community offering. So you can mix the wine of different types of offerings as well, and from one day to another, so long as their mincha offerings had either been offered or were mixed in a way that there was still kosher. And when one mixes together wine libations, he may mix the wine libations of the accompanying offerings of bulls with those of the accompanying offering of rams, or those of the accompanying offerings of sheep with others of the accompanying offerings of sheep. One should not ever mix the wine libations of the accompanying offerings of sheep with those of bulls or rams. See, here's the thing. Although bulls, it was 3 esronim with, I think it was 2 log, and the ram is different, but the ratio is the same. So therefore, you could mix the wines together, because even if the mincha offering of the ram and bull did get mixed together, although you're not supposed to do it together, but if it happened to have got mixed together, it would still be kosher because the ratios are the same. Therefore, you're allowed to mix their wine libations. But the mincha offering of the sheep, as we've mentioned, the ratio of oil to flour is different to the ratio of oil to flour for rams or bulls. And if those mix together, it would never be a kosher mixture. So therefore, that you're not allowed to mix the wines of, even if it happened. You're not allowed to mix the wines of. And the final halacha, he says, as an initial preference, one should not mix wine libations unless the meal offerings have been mixed together or they have been offered, as we explained. Temidin, uMusafim, bless me, the Merciful One, and granted us assistance to complete the learning of this section of the additional and daily sacrifices. Okay, let's see if we get to graduate the class, because just finishing it is not good enough. You have to answer at least 3 out of 4 questions. So the first question, which animals are offered throughout the holiday of Sukkot, decreasing in number each day? Was it bulls, rams, or goats?
Bulls.
Excellent, right? And 2, what is the law if the water libation of Sukkot is done at night? It's acceptable, right? So even though ideally it should be done in the morning together with the wine libation, but it is acceptable. If the water which was brought for the water libation spilled on the Shabbat, what should be done? So remember, it was prepared before Shabbat, you kept it, now it's spilled.
The middle one.
Number 2.
Water from the
That's it, right? You cannot
number
get new water.
Number 2, yeah.
And you do still want to do the libation. So number 2, you can get water from the kiyar. Excellent. And a final question, may the fats of different communal sacrifices be mixed and brought on the altar together?
No.
No.
Excellent, 100%.
Wow.
You guys get to move up a grade.
Graduation.
Congratulations. Yasher koach.
Thanks, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you, Rabbi. Thank you.
Hanukkah Sameach.
Thanks a lot for Hanukkah. Next week, please God. So we move on to new law area of law tomorrow. We'll see, please God, next week.